مفهد موجودات حضرة فهر عالم محمد مصطفى
Now, Sidi Yusuf's just about to start reading. If people can't hear him, then please let me know in the chat or something, but hopefully you can.
Shall I start?
Sure.
This point notwithstanding, it is also important, in order to bring the question of Nafs al-Amr into sharper relief, that it be distinguished from another form of truth justification. The question of ontological justification of the sciences, Nafs al-Amr, here broadly speaking, our correspondence theory, is distinct from that of the internal justification of the sciences, in modern parlance, i.e. the foundationalist theory. Although intimately intertwined and both centrally important to a full account of truth, these are distinct metaphysical themes. The classical foundationalist theory in Islamic philosophy grounds inferential, speculative, theoretical, nadari propositions, which are not analytically self-evident, but require syllogistic or other forms of proof, firmly in necessary, daruri, and self-evident, bedihi propositions. The epistemic roots of the mountain to which the build-up of propositions can be traced, and which guarantee their self-coherent truth. Yet even this is not enough for a full account of truth. The brute phenomenological fact of this form of foundationalist justification, the fact that we encounter it experientially, does not account for its being, nor provide it with more than self-referential truth validity. That is, it cannot assure us beyond a shadow of a doubt that first principles correspond to Nafs al-Amr. The proximate locus of self-evident propositions and innate concepts is the mind of the individual subject. But as we will hear from a number of prominent Islamic philosophers in the course of this paper, the fact of dwelling in the inner mind is no guarantee of truth. For otherwise, obviously false propositions like every animal is a man, or 1 + 2 = 2, would have to be true just because we can think them. For example, the principles nothing nothing comes from nothing, and it is impossible that a thing both be and not be in exactly the same manner and conditions seem true to us, indeed the basis of many other truths. Yet if the only evidence we have for this is the fact that we encounter such principles in our internal landscape and cannot help but assent to them, we are in no wise justified in claiming that there is a strictly ontological justification, something about the nature of being and the world for believing them to be true, unless we are to acknowledge that they must correspond to something beyond themselves, which can account for that appearance and that encounter. That is, for anything, even something as fundamental as the logical principle of non-contradiction, to be ontologically and not merely phenomenologically valid, it must correspond to something beyond its appearances, something rooted in the nature of being itself, that can account for and validate its truth within the particular logical contexts in which it appears. Since these fundamental principles are intelligible entities, which do not have individual reference in extramental particulars, the next question that must be asked is, what is the ultimate ontological status of intelligible entities? In some sense, whether entirely consciously or not, we certainly experience such intelligible entities, the principle of non-contradiction, the figures of the syllogism, the pure concepts of identity, necessity, possibility, unity, multiplicity, abstract mathematical entities, and so on. Ordinary rational cognition cannot operate without them.
Can we stop there? Oh no, actually, I'm so sorry. Could we not stop there? Because can we go up to that is what independent extramental feature, mode or realm of existence?
Moreover, we all bear witness to their utility and indeed its indispensability throughout the diverse branches of human knowledge, but do their particularized instances in the loci of the mind and the same physical world external to the mind constitute the ultimate guarantors of the suprasubjective reality? If not, whence do they come, and in what form do they ultimately subsist? That is, what independent, extramental feature, mode, or realm of existence does our knowledge itself correspond to, including all including all the cognitive and representational apparatuses from which it is inseparable.
Thank you very much. So, traditional philosophy and theology prior to modernity was almost always foundationalist, and some of the very few exceptions to that were various forms of ancient skepticism, materialism, whether that's Democritus or it was Lucretius or it was the Stoics. The Stoics are a little bit more of a complicated case, but they are ultimately materialists with a few funny, immaterial seeming things tacked on. The important thing is that the foundationalist philosophies, they trumped those other philosophies. They were basically seen to have refuted those philosophies, to have rendered those philosophies untenable. And so Plato, broadly, his philosophy is I mean, this is very, very broad, but it's broadly a foundationalist philosophy. Aristotle, broadly a foundationalist philosophy. This was seen to have triumphed in the Neoplatonic period, for example. This was something which was normative standard philosophy. Science, I mean, this was, the other approaches were not really tenable. Same thing in the European Middle Ages, the same thing in the Islamic world, rooted in posterior analytics 1-3, where Aristotle rules out the possibility of an infinite regress in our knowledge. So what's an infinite regress is basically tasalsul. So what that means is that if our knowledge always had to be justified at every conceivable step, then we would have an impossible infinite regress, and we wouldn't ultimately be able to root any of our knowledge at all, because whenever you think you'd got to the starting point, you would actually find that there was another thing which was prior, and then there was another thing that was prior, and then when you get to that thing, there's another thing that's prior, and then wherever you go, there's always, just like you can always add one more number on, but the opposite way around. An infinite regress in justification, as in, I can't consistently doubt that I'm seeing these colors at the moment. That's not a question of, are they really a hallucination or something? That's just, I can't consistently doubt that I'm experiencing them. That the question of whether they're a hallucination or could I be asleep or something, that's a completely different question. The operative question when we talk about are they daruri is, can I consistently doubt the experience? And I can't consistently doubt the experience that I'm having. Can I doubt my ontological interpretation of what it is? Yes, but but then that's when things like the principle of non-contradiction would enter, and rational principles which would enable me to determine the ontological status of the experience that I'm having. So foundationalism can take many forms, but ultimately what it means is that you might say that our complex sense experiences are reducible to simple sense experiences, and our complex propositions and chains of reasoning are reducible to self-evident. Ultimately, our saying God exists, there is a transcendent ground of being. There is one transcendent ground of being who is the source, the transcendent source of all finite being. Ultimately, in terms of the application of the cognitive structures, the structures of our cognitive apparatus to the matter of the world, matter in the logical sense, the principle of non-contradiction applied to that data yields the fact that God exists. You can, if you take the conclusion God exists, and you wanted to take that all the way back to first principles, then a self-evident principle, the principle of non-contradiction, would be something that regulates your results at every step of the way. And this is something you'll find in very basic in our Kalam tradition, Sayyid Sharif al-Jurjani, whoever happens to be, exactly the same principle of the posterior analytics, which is that al-ulum al-nadhariyya tastanidu ila al-ulum al-daruriyya, because otherwise you would have a tasalsul situation. You have to have an absolute starting point. So when you look at the beginning of Kalam books called fi Ithbat al-ulum al-daruriyya, that's what you will find is the kind of fundamental basic principle. Now, this is often the fact that our starting points in knowledge are self-evident. Principle of identity, principle of non-contradiction, the structures of concomitance, of lazum, of entailment, all of these kinds of, they're all things which we can't prove, we just find ourselves equipped with. We can't consistently doubt. Why can't we consistently doubt it? Because whenever you try to define being, the elements you're using already necessarily have being. Whenever you try to define the one, the things which you're using are already necessarily unities. Some people say knowledge is also self-evident. Some people say various shape is self-evident. The definition has to be better known than the thing you're trying to define. It's one of the basic principles of definition. So this is basically what foundationalism means, very basically. But the point is this what this book is about? It's not. A brilliant justification of foundationalism is to be found here. The book obviously does many other things, but it's to be found here. This is not the question. This is about a theory of truth in the Nafs al-Amr book, and it's more or less defending a correspondence theory of truth. So it's important to distinguish those two. But what unites both of the approaches is that the foundation that both Dr. Karim and I, in my little book, are trying to go beyond just appealing to self-evidence, because there is a problem there which has been exacerbated by the modern context and methodological skepticism, which is, well, we happen to be equipped with this way of looking at the world. Indeed, we may have reasons to believe, but can we be certain that the way we happen to be equipped, the structures we have naturally for looking at the world in our cognitive apparatuses actually match on to how the world really is? How do we know that we are not imposing those structures onto the world? This is not simply a kind of Kantian difficulty that we are intimidated by and then have to deal with. You find intimations of this in someone like Sadruddin al-Qunawi when he's actually critiquing reason. And he has a way around it which is beautiful, which doesn't shut off the possibility of metaphysical knowledge. Whereas Kant, because of all sorts of things which are perhaps in his intellectual background, which have led him to think like that, is not able to avoid shutting off the route to metaphysical knowledge. So basically, the difference is here, instead of just presuming a foundation list that self-evidence alone is an adequate foundation, what we want to ask is, what is it about the way being is itself, the way the world itself is, what is it about reality which means that these concepts, these apparatuses, these so-called abstract entities by which we cognize the world actually describe things as they are. They're actually rooted in things as they are, and simultaneously in a single diffusion, the being of the world and the intelligibility of the world, which presupposes the existence of knowers knowing the world, is all part of one effusion. It's not two separate orders of being. There's no split in reality. It's not that the process of evolution happens and then a few billion years later, these minds sprout out and start looking at the world. Then you have a real problem, because the structures by which they know the world weren't rooted in the way the world really is. Consciousness was an epiphenomenon. It was like a They call it an emergent property, right? Now, is that even a coherent point of view? I think also what is different about our approach, possibly, is that we don't seek, as so many modern Kalam polemics do, and I don't think that we seek to be polemical at all, but we don't want to meet that kind of fundamentally unintelligible modern view on its own terms, because when you do that, you're accepting that that's a coherent point of view. So we're not, refusing this person, refusing that person, while accepting, this whole shelf of premises in these Batil arguments, but rather it represents a totally unintelligible way of looking at the world. Can we go on, Maulana?
Knowledge, after all, is knowledge of something existing in reality. If reality is no more than the very phenomenon of perception itself, in itself, whence our distinction between true and false propositions? If the contents of our mind are reality itself, we have once again awoken in the nightmare of a solipsistic idealism. We have no control over the intelligible features of our objects of knowledge, and yet no way to see past our modes of knowing them to any extramental realms that might have given rise to them. There are a few truths which promptly rescue us from these skeptical thoughts. One is that our knowledge in its particular modality is obviously contingent with respect to its particular modus, because the specifically human mode of knowing did not have to be the way it is. This very possibility provides strong evidence that knowledge itself, as it is in its specifically human form, arises from an extramental, intelligible reality that contains more possibilities of knowing and known than those manifest in the particular structure of the human mind. Moreover, and closely related, human knowledge is contingent, which is to say that we are obviously not the efficient causes of our own knowledge. This is shown by the fact that our experience of knowledge is evidently primarily effective, in fi'ali rather than active, fi'li. That is, one of being acted upon rather than doing. As human beings, we are, as it were, forced to know, in the broadest sense of know. We are unable to choose not to do so. Consequently, no single human being, in the sheer brute fact of the rational nature of his identity or individual nature, could possibly ever account for the universal phenomenon of knowledge itself, along with his very being. It has been caused by something outside of himself, and made to become individuated in each member of his species, including presently non-existent possible future members of the species, in a unique manner in each case. Our knowledge, then, if it is true, must plainly proceed from a realm or reality outside of itself. In other words, one that is extramental, one capable of causing the universal phenomenon of knowledge to become manifest in each individual member of the human species. In this study, within the context of the indigenous resources of Islamic philosophy, we will try to ascertain whether it is possible, justifiably, to attempt to identify the nature of this realm, nafsul amr, or things as they are, without in themselves.
Sorry?
Without in themselves.
There's just one place that we failed to take out in themselves. I believe the whole rest of the book is things as they are.
Things as they are. The mere exploration of this most fundamental of questions will, we contend, be instrumental in suggesting the outlines of any future theological system able to serve the genuine and faithful continuation of a higher Sunni kalam, a type of kalam that is today seriously and literally at risk of extinction. As we have said, there exist a number of approaches to dealing with Nafs al-Amr. Perhaps the most distinctive aspect of this study is that it hopes to be open to the full scope of the sources of knowledge that the ulama drew upon in their formulations of various theories of Nafs al-Amr, even though some of these sources may feel unfamiliar or seem incredible to many who have grown up surrounded by the general epistemological assumptions that characterize contemporary fashion. That is, we hope to be open to the results of the scholar sages who acknowledge that underlying and informing the discursive intellect, al-aql min haythu huwa mutafakkir, there is always the receptive intellect, al-aql min haythu huwa qabil. Intellects have a limit at which they must come to a halt insofar as they are discursive, not insofar as they are receptive.
Can we start there? So there are fundamental principles with which we cannot cognize the world. Let's just back up a bit. Okay, try to delete relation right now from whatever is around you. Relation. Try to delete unity This is a genuine and necessary feature of the intelligibility of the world at the moment. If relation is not there, then the world I'm experiencing is not there. The unities, substantial unities. I mean, this is not a joke. This is not just some sort of metaphysical luxury that, well, let's think about all these abstract things. You know, why is it that I'm an individual being? All of the things going on within me are part of me. All the things going on within Sidi Yusuf are part of him and just him, and so on. Whereas if we analyze the individual from the broad naturalistic point of view, I don't find a substantial unity. I just find lots and lots of different properties. There's that property, I can analyze that property and that property. But where is the unity, the substantial unity? It's not something that I can see empirically. Again, essence. Try to delete relation so we wouldn't be related, and that would take away the difference. Well, the only way that would be possible if there was no difference. So if there is difference, then there must be relation as well. So difference as well. Why is the world distinct? Well, it's distinct because there are essences informing natures such that things have a different mabda al-athar. The mabda of athar of a plant is not the same as a horse, and it's not the same as a human being. There's something informing that matter. What is it that makes the world distinct? Why do we see difference? And if there's difference, there's relation. And that essence also has to be a unity, and it also has to have been possible. Look, there's all sorts of things that could be here, and we have to face the question of, when we look at the world, why are only all of these possible things here? Well, it's because they're all possible. But if you look in terms of the broadest notion of modality, it's actually necessary for there to be some intrinsic property. I mean, Ibn Rushd thinks possibility corresponds to prime matter in extramental reality. But, you know, try to delete all of those things. Try to delete the notion of substance. Try to delete the notion of relation. Try to delete the notion of unity, the notion of essence, the notion of multiplicity. Try to coherently contend that these are purely mental, as in there is nothing out there corresponding to them. If you say so, then our cognition of the world is subjective. There is nothing in reality. There's nothing rooted in reality. That's why the emergent property, the epiphenomenalism, is so absurd, because you are explicitly telling us as part of your theory that none of these cognitive apparatuses which you employ in order to tell us evolution is true are actually rooted in the nature of reality. So why on earth would you think that you should trust your intellectual abilities? So then we have this difficulty of, well, are we going to remain purely locked into the realm of the conceptual? Are we going to be able to transcend the discursive? Is there any sense in which it's a terrible poverty to be stuck within these kind of logical structures, and I'm building ever and ever more complicated syllogisms and whatever it happens to me? So in this study, this is on page 18 in the middle, in this study, within the context of the indigenous resources of Islamic philosophy, we'll try to ascertain whether it is possible justifiably to attempt to identify the nature of this realm, nafs al-amr, or things as they are in themselves. Perhaps the most distinctive aspect of this study is that it hopes to be open to the full scope of the sources of knowledge that the ulama drew upon in their formulations of various theories of nafs al-amr, even though some of these sources may feel unfamiliar or seem incredible to many who have grown up surrounded by the general epistemological assumptions that characterize contemporary fashion. That is, we hope to be open to the results of the scholar sages who acknowledge that underlying and informing the discursive intellect, there is always the receptive intellect. Intellects have a limit at which they must come to a halt insofar as they are discursive, not insofar as they are receptive. Can we go on, Yamalana? Can you shout, please?
This magisterial Akbarian distinction is one of the most fruitful in all of what, for the sake of convenience, we might call philosophy. Although clearly the purpose of the distinction is partly to demonstrate how philosophy as commonly understood might be transcended, and indeed that strictly speaking there can be no such thing as pure reason. Briefly, the receptive intellect is the human intellect as the effective, infi'ali receptacle of knowledge. In general terms, this encompasses receptivity to all possible types of knowledge, whether, for example, sense knowledge or that provided by the revelation of sacred texts. Perhaps the most important dimension of this distinction in the context of widening the scope of knowledge of Nafs al-Amr is the receptivity of this aspect of intellect to the gnosis of mystical unveiling, kashf. The important point is that this is knowledge that man is taught. He cannot experience the particular corner of the sensible world. He cannot not experience the particular corner of the sensible world that has been destined to be all he knows of that sensible world. He cannot not encounter the holy effusion of the Quranic revelation, if it has been determined that this should be his lot. He is receptive to all manner of insights, intuitions, dreams, and premonitions, and indeed to true kashf, in which discursive thinking plays no essential part. What is more, it is this experience, sense experience, the experience of the one over the many, and perhaps revelational and mystical as well, if he is given them, which the discursive intellect tries to make sense of and cannot escape being wholly informed by. The discursive intellect is reason, the intellect that employs necessary first principles and innate concepts, organizes premises, constructs syllogisms, and discerns necessary entailment, the rational mind of speculative philosophy, while Shaykh al-Akbar ibn Arabi, the greatest master, does acknowledge that it is within the proper competence of the discursive intellect to demonstrate fundamental articles of faith, like God's existence and unity, and the reality of divine messengers and revelation. It often has difficulty understanding truths provided by the very revelation it has proven to be real, about the actual nature of God and his spiritual world. It's sometimes even denying these truths altogether on the basis of proofs of their apparent logical impossibility, the Mu'tazili rejection of the beatific vision and the philosopher's rejection of the bodily resurrection spring to mind. Of course, these particular rational proofs are not, says Ibn Arabi, true proofs in Nafs al-Amr. The essences of such matters cannot be arrived at through the exercise of mere reason. Reason must thus be aided by direct experience. This is because the discursive intellect requires matter to work on. On its own, it can provide little more than empty logical form. In his Futuhat, the greatest master goes on to give a full account of this internal contingency of the discursive intellect. Quote, when the cogitative faculty, al-quwa al-mufakkira, proceeds to the imagery, al-khayal, it is dependent on the form-bearing faculty, al-quwa al-musawwira, in order to construct by means of it out of the matters that have been apprehended by the imagery, to form the evidence regarding a particular thing and a conclusive proof wherein it can be grounded in sensible knowledge or necessary principles, which are both set within man's natural disposition. Now, when thought, al-fikr, conceives that proof, the intellect, al-aql, then takes it from it and passes judgment upon the object of proof. There is no faculty but that it has impediments and errors that need to be differentiated from that which is established and accurate. Look then, my brother, how impoverished the intellect is, in that it knows nothing we have mentioned except through these faculties, that themselves have such defects. We have come to know that the intellect has nothing of itself, and that all of the knowledge it acquires only obtains because the intellect is characterized by the attribute of receptivity, qabul. It's receiving from its Lord that which he Most High says about himself, then is superior to its receiving from its thought. End quote. The imagery can, in the first instance, only work on what it receives from the senses. If the memory does not then retain what is obtained in the imagery, it will be lost. This deprives the imagery of numerous aspects of the proper representation of the full range of sensible particulars. The faculty of memory will then stand in need of the faculty that can remind it, al-quwa al-mudhakkira. The point is, underlying reason, there are numerous faculties quite susceptible to deficiency or error, which reason itself has no control over. Thought, al-fikr, is a blind follower, muqallid, of the imagery, and the imagery is a blind follower of the senses, and over and beyond thought's blind following. It is not even able to keep hold of its thoughts without help from the memory. and the faculty that reminds the memory. In itself, reason possesses no knowledge at all, except its innate necessary principles. الضروريات التي فطر عليها. How strange then that despite knowing reason's radical contingency upon these faculties, people continue to find it far-fetched that underlying reason there exists a more fundamental faculty which, with spiritual exercises and the transcendence of mere thought, can, as quasi-necessary but not sufficient conditions, give different and more trustworthy results than those yielded by unaided reason.
Can we stop there, Milan? Thank you. The Shaykh al-Akbar affirms, and he affirms in many, many different places in Al-Futuhat, that the Aql can know, and this is against those who deny this of him, and it's absolutely untenable, that notion, the idea that he says that the Aql can't know anything, can't know his existence of God, it can't know that is absolutely untrue. The Shaykh al-Akbar affirms in many, many different places, in very plain language, that the Aql is capable of knowing the existence of God, the unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the whole of negative theology, the via negativa, and imkan al-risala, and the actuality of risala. But then, once we have assent to the revelation, even in that very, well, in some sense, meager capacity, we find that in the revelation, قد أتى في إخباره عنه تعالى بنسب وأمور كان الدليل العقلي يحيلها ويرمي بها فتوقف العقل واتهم معرفته وقدح في دليله هذا الإنباء الإلهي بما نسبه لنفسه ولا يقدر على تكذيب المخبر. So the rationalist, for want of a better word, then finds himself in a very difficult situation because he has come to know the truth of revelation through his aql, but then he finds that there are things in the revelation which don't accord with his rational structures. For example, the Mu'tazili says it's impossible that we could see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, it says that we will, وجوه يومئذ ناظرة إلى ربها ناظرة, and the hadith about it, but it says that we will, but it's not really what it means. And we have to, interpret it so that it accords with our rational structures. For example, and then he says further on, وَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ الَّذِي اتَّخَذَهُ دَلِيلًا عَلَى إِحَالَةِ ذَلِكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ لَمْ يَكُنْ دَلِيلًا فِي نَفْسِ الْأَمْرِ. Now, why is this incredible? وَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ الَّذِي اتَّخَذَهُ دَلِيلًا عَلَى إِحَالَةِ ذَلِكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ لَمْ يَكُنْ دَلِيلًا فِي نَفْسِ الْأَمْرِ. It's not in reality a dalil, but because the person is stuck in their limitary rational structures, the one they happen to know about, they think it's a dalil, but it's not a dalil in nafs al-amr. If it was a dalil in nafs al-amr, it would make the thing not true. That's what I'm trying to say. And this is further shown just straight after. فإن العقل قد يصيب وقد يخطئ. وإن بقي للعقل بعد كشفه وتحقيقه لصحة هذا الأمر الذي نسبه الله لنفسه ووصف به نفسه وقبلته عقول الأنبياء. So it's not that the Anbiya were saying, oh, look, there's my reason, I'm rejecting that, and this is something beyond. No, قبلته عقول الأنبياء. Those things that our reason says are impossible. قبلته عقول الأنبياء.
Reason is the human universalizing intellectual faculty reflecting and able to discern the hierarchical order of intelligible relations, like those of identity and difference, priority and posteriority, subordinacy and superordinacy, participation and subsumption, causal relations, and so on.
They're not casual relations.
And so on, that are constitutive of the intelligible structure governing both sensible particular and universal being, as well as being which transcends both the sensible particular and the universal. By combining these elements in accordance with the rules of logic, rules that themselves reflect this ontological and even more fundamentally henological backdrop of hierarchy and priority, reason can achieve its goal, which is to arrive, guided by the principle of non-contradiction, at natures and essences in their full distinctness. Yet reason is almost totally at the mercy of even more fundamental human faculties, which provide the actual content, the matter of intellection. For example, when reason utilizes the term horse in a proposition, it is not because reason has been able to conjure real individual animals into existence by some sort of syllogistic process. And this is because the syllogistic process presupposes rather than provides the matter that it works upon. Instead, the particular individual animals that one meets, whence the term animal is abstracted, as the matter for some instance of speculative reasoning, are given to one's cognition. If circumstances have not enabled one to have ever seen or heard of a horse, one will not be able to reason about them at all. Reason itself then is quite helpless. It does nothing more than to impose the form, for example, a particular figure and mood of the syllogism, onto matter that it cannot strictly speaking choose, but that is rather given to it. To assist us in absorbing this...
Right, let's stop there, because I don't think I was hoping we might be able to get at least close to finishing, but we'll definitely finish the introduction next time.
Yes. So my question is about the receptive nature of the intellect. So we began that discussion about the receptivity of the intellect after we were previously speaking about the purely intelligible and abstract features of reality. I wanted to ask that are those purely intelligible features like unity, multiplicity, and so on, are these also sort of received by the intellect? So when we use the word receptive, do we include these features, purely intelligible features of reality, to be a part of that?
Yes, in the very broadest sense, absolutely. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who's a remarkable thinker, I mean, he said, reason is just another species of revelation. This is a divine gift that we are given. And he also says, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, that the relation of the intellect to metaphysical reality is like the relation of the eye to a sensible reality. It uncovers, it sheds light on, it unveils. This is one of the arguments of the book, that these, just to give you a sneak peek, that these, what we think imminently are the features of our cognitive apparatuses, are actually features of reality that possess their own exemplary forms that condition degrees of being prior to the degree of alam al-mulk, that are meta principles which are beyond even the transcendentals. The transcendentals transcend the categories, but the meta principles transcend the transcendentals, and that are ultimately rooted in the primary attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one of the arguments that you'll find in chapter 4. Maulana Sachi.
Yeah, just if you could, I was wondering if you could go a little bit more into what you said earlier about the interaction between kashf and discursive knowledge.
These different orders of intelligibility are continuous. Seeing the malakuti dimension of things that are in the mulk may well be something that is gifted to someone. They may see what is in the mulk, and they may also see the malakuti dimension of that thing, the existence of that thing in alam al-mithal, the pure meaning of that thing, the existence of that thing, of the exemplar of that thing in alam al-arwah. They might see that. Let me read a little passage, and then we'll have pretty much ready to close. In occupying various intelligible positions of priority and posteriority in the hierarchical scheme of order uncovered by the more holistic mode of reason we advocate in this study, whose primary intuition is not the empirical particular, but rather the one over the many which uncovers this intrinsic order, these haqa'iq, these objects of mystical cognition, leave their imprint on reality by informing an intelligible order accessible by this henological experiential reason. A reason illuminated by direct experience of those realities will experience that intelligible order, but without the benefit of experience, reason nonetheless remains not entirely bereft, still able to discern that order, however faintly, through a glass darkly. It is, after all, possible for the single effusion of being and truth to overflow into the realm of speculative thought, such that the principles of mystical unveiling become accessible even to that familiar particularized framework. For human reason constitutes a limitative power of the human spirit, as Maulana Sadruddin al-Qunwi says, the spirit that with respect to itself possesses a much broader scope of knowledge of reality. Reason is a power which, with respect to its temporal unfolding, constitutes the process by which multiplicities are subsumed into unities in accordance with the dictates of causal priority and posteriority. Yet that temporal process thereby uncovers realities that are in themselves timeless. Indeed, the structures of reason in themselves are timeless. It is only with respect to their instantiation within our states of physical situatedness that they take on modes of subordinate contingency with respect to individual temporal unfolding. Thus, an elevated form of holistic reason, which recognizes that the appearances of reason are only possible because of prior exemplary forms that grant them intelligibility and rootedness in being, is capable from behind the veil, as it were, of demonstrating the truth of certain Kashfi reality without having yet witnessed them by means of Kashf. The relation between Kashf and speculative, and I say certain realities, the relation between Kashf and speculative investigation can also obtain from the opposite starting point. The demonstrative proof corresponding to a Kashfi reality may also be obtained from the Kashf experience itself, insofar as the causal priority and subsumption of multiplicities into unities encountered in some mystical experiences possess their analogues in the logical order after the mystic has returned to more or less familiar ordinary spatiotemporal conditions. In any case, we'll keep discussion of that for next time. Bismillah ta'ala. Thank you, Maulana Setri. Thank you, everyone. And it was lovely to see you all. And I very much look forward to seeing you again. And Allah bless you all. Please keep us in your prayers. Jazakallah khair. Maulana, Iman, is there a possibility that we could end with a prayer?
اللهم اغفر لنا كل الذنوب واستر لنا كل العيوب وتب علينا يا مولانا لنتوب وقربنا إليك زلفى ورعنا في السر والنجوى وارزقنا رؤية الحبيب المصطفى والنبي المجتبى صلى الله عليه وصحبه وسلم وحقق لنا آمالنا وفوق آمالنا بفضلك سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. سر الفاتحة.